this week alone, especially in the last couple days, there are even more crazy stories and more red flags coming out of China and Hong Kong, specifically about the Chinese economy. So today, on Friday, September 6, 2019, we found out that China's central bank announced that they were cutting reserve ratios. So China's central bank said it will cut the amount of cash banks must hold as reserves to the lowest level since 2007, injecting liquidity into an economy facing both a domestic slowdown and trade war headwinds. The required reserve ratio for all banks will be lowered by 0.5 percentage points, taking effect on September 16th, the PBOC, People's Bank of China, said on its website Friday. The PBOC also cut the reserve ratios by 1 percentage point for some city commercial banks to take effect in 2 steps on October 15th and November 15th. The cuts will release 900 billion yuan, which is $126 billion, guys. So the cuts don't seem like a lot, but they're injecting $126 billion of additional liquidity, the People's Bank of China said, helping to offset the tightening impact of upcoming tax payments. That is more than the previous cuts in January and May, which released 800 billion yuan and 280 billion yuan respectively, the PBO said at those times. The People's Bank of China monetary policy, the shift is aimed at supporting demand by funneling credit to small firms and echoes the earlier cuts this year. While limited, it could also put pressure on the already weakening yuan, which may antagonize President Donald Trump. And PBOC officials indicated recently they are wary of larger scale easing measures and have so far refrained from following the U.S. Federal Reserve in cutting benchmark interest rates. So there's more to the article here. It says the cut doesn't reflect an aggressive easing, says a senior emerging markets economist at Commerce Bank in Singapore. In fact, China has recently massively tightened property financing, hence this is still a rebalancing. Well, it's a dangerous rebalancing because they already have a credit bubble. So they're trying to pull all these different levers here, 1 up, 1 down, 2 up, 2 down, 2 up, 3 down, 3 up, 2 down. It's getting very confusing to a lot of different people, all the rules changes. And if you look at the chart of the dollar to yuan exchange rate, let me see if I have it up here. It was up on one of the, I have so many windows up right now. Okay, I think I have it up here. And it looks like that there's been pressure since September 2nd when the exchange rate hit 7.1720 yuan to the dollar, and it's been hammered back down. So it looks like China has been a lot more aggressive with those derivatives, using the selling massive amounts of forward dollar swaps, massive amounts of them. But that is not the only China news. So China is trying to get the credit back into the system. They already have a credit bubble, so it seems that they're being even more aggressive. They're trying to get that credit back and flowing, although not in real estate, it appears. They're trying to get the lending to move the credit bubble elsewhere. But today also, Hong Kong, they had their credit rating downgraded by Fitch. So there's Hong Kong's credit rating was dropped from AA plus down to just AA. And their outlook was switched from stable to negative. And if you want to read more about that, I have the South China Morning Post article. But there's other crazy stories, guys. There's a bunch of them. So the pork prices, I've reported on this for months now. I think, one of the first people to talk about this in the Western media. There was some coverage, but I was covering this a lot more, talking about pork shortages with the African swine flu and also the increases in vegetables and elsewhere. And China's own data from China's National Bureau of Statistics confirmed what my top China source said. He was telling me this 2 months before China's National Bureau of Statistics reported the price increases. So it's a very delicate situation with pork and pork prices in China. And there was actually a speech that was translated into English from a vice premier of the Chinese Communist Party. It was from the Dim Sum blog. So bringing clarity to a murky Chinese economy, the vice premier, pork shortages must not spoil the party, is the article. And Chinese officials are worried that a 10 million ton pork shortage could spoil upcoming Communist Party celebrations, according to a transcript of a speech ordering local officials to bolster pork supplies. In fact, the speech's instructions to manage public opinion and constant shifting of priorities of the communist regime suggests the celebrations may ring hollow anyway. So there's a bunch of lists. There's a bunch of suggestions in here talking about the pork market. The African swine flu virus, the Vice Premier he is admitting that the African swine virus has created a pork shortage in the speech, and that China has to try to rebuild the pork population. The problem is that pork prices, according to China's own data, are up 40% in the last year for regular pork prices, but the Chinese government has attempted to subsidize this. So the average Chinese person does not see an increase in the pork prices, but that's not sustainable. Eventually, the shortages are going to be felt with higher prices. China can't permanently subsidize this, especially because China consumes so much pork, and they were the largest pork producer, and the US is the second largest pork producer and was nowhere near the level of China. And the US and China together are basically a monopoly on pork production. The US and China are. So it's going to be, and if China's not importing pork from the US, and if they're going to either not import any agricultural products from the US, charge a high tariff, or not import them at all, then China's not going to be able to get the pork it needs. And pork, or pork lard, I was being told by my top China source that pork lard is a staple. It's used in a lot of Chinese dishes as normally like a type of oil in a wok or seasoning. So it's used to wok a lot of vegetables. And the price of vegetables have also gone up a lot. And from what I've heard, in the last couple weeks, the Chinese government did attempt to end the pork subsidy for a very short period of time, and it did not go very well at all. And within, I think, a couple weeks, the subsidy was back on. There was a panic. So, and I just have this article also that my top China source sent me from September 2nd from Reuters. A city in southern China, was selling a limited quantity of pork at discounted prices to help consumers cope with soaring prices. As the world's top pork-eating nation deals with a meat shortage caused by the death of pigs due to African swine fever. So from September 1st onward, people in Nanning, the capital of the southwestern Guangxi region, can buy up to 1 kilogram of pork a day at a discount of more than 10% to the average market price over the previous 10 days, said the state-backed Nanning Evening News on Sunday. So pork prices in Nanning rose to 40 yuan, $5.64 per kilogram last week, according to a website. And China's hog herd, the world's largest, has shrunk by about a third. It says it shrunk by about a third since a year ago, but I've read you other research and other people's studies, including Hong Kong farmers who don't trust mainland Chinese pork now, where the Hong Kong farmers are saying that they think that China's hog herd is down by 50% or more. Also, Zero Hedge just put this out, guys. They put out a chart tracking piglet prices in China, and that they're up 162% year to date, an all-time high. The chart is crazy. It's gone totally vertical. So China is being hurt by higher food prices. The yuan has been devalued. The exchange rate has changed markedly since the beginning of August, although it looks like recently, this week, starting at the beginning of this week, the Chinese government has been more aggressive, probably with the Chinese banks going in there and selling those derivatives to short the dollar and to try to stabilize their currency. But there's other crazy Chinese stories, guys. I'm not done. There was another story that came out today from Reuters, September 6th, that China says new digital currency will be similar to Facebook's Libra. So China's proposed new digital currency would bear some similarities to Facebook's Libra coin and would be able to be used across major payment platforms such as WeChat and Alipay, a senior People's Bank of China central bank officer said. So the deputy director of the People's Bank of China's payments department said the development of their government crypto coin would help protect the country's foreign exchange sovereignty as commercial applications of such currencies expanded. It's, quote, why is the central bank still doing such a digital currency today when electronic payment methods are so developed? Said Mu, the person at the People's Bank of China, the deputy director of digital payments department. According to a transcript of a lecture he gave this week that was published online, it is to protect our monetary sovereignty and legal currency status. Probably also now, if they have a fully government coin, like a Fed coin, a Chinese version of a Fed coin, then in real time, they can China's already cashless, but it's more that people are doing it out of convenience. They do it on their smartphone. They use Alipay or WeChat, and there's QR codes. But this would be by government force. And then government, it would be easier to integrate with a cashless society than a forced cashless society, and to track and tax every transaction in real time. Because what a blockchain also is a very sophisticated and advanced database that's encrypted. And then that would tie in with the social credit score. So almost in real time, guys, if the Chinese government, this is an example, if the Chinese government saw that you had bought with the currency, you had bought a VPN membership, like a monthly VPN membership, they could instantly dock your social credit score or some other thing that the government didn't like you doing. So that story is also out. And finally, there's one more story here that I really wanted to bring to your guys' attention. I'm going to dinner in a little bit because I just passed 5 million views. So thank you very much to everyone who's a loyal listener who's been sticking with me since the beginning. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get to 5 million views, especially doing everything all by myself lately. But thank you very much to my almost 150 now Patreon account contributors, my almost a dozen now PayPal monthly contributors, and to the people who throw me a tip once in a while. It's much appreciated. If you don't have money to tip, that's fine. I know times are tough. The economy is not good, and it's probably going in the toilet further. I will go where the information goes. So if U.S. insurance companies are about to lose enormous amounts of their money on collateralized loan obligations, and they're going to need a bailout, that will be reported on. I will go where the information goes. And the stories, guys, that are coming out lately, a lot of the worst stuff is about China. A lot of the worst stuff, unfortunately for China, is about China. So I think the trade war, the tariffs, and what Trump is implementing, I think, with Kyle Bass, with the trade war strategy, is hurting China. And China's also... They were offered, according to Kyle Bass, China was offered win-win trade deals 3 or 4 months ago, and China walked away. China was offered win-win trade deals, and she and the other people who were negotiating didn't want to accept it. It wasn't good enough for them. They didn't just want a win-win trade deal that was mutually beneficial for both countries. They wanted a deal where it was almost entirely or only beneficial to China. And any compromise that she does, any major compromise that she does, it makes them look very weak to the other major party officials. And there's another rival faction in there. China Uncensored is covering that. I think the other rival guy, Xi'an. I think Trump does occasionally listen to Kyle Bass. I'm not sure how often he does. I know Kyle Bass has told them about the dollar shortage and about the derivatives position. I know that Kyle Bass has talked about that publicly. So let me make sure I got all the stories. Oh, there was one last story, guys. This one was updated a couple days ago. Epoch Times. And I just found this. I was doing research for my interview with Tavi Costa earlier today, looking at the oil market. And shockingly, on the oilprice.com website, it's one of the top couple stories in the discussion section there. And it's China faces economic collapse. I clicked on it. I just found this story about 2 hours ago from the Epoch Times. It's from September 3rd. It was updated on September 3rd. And it's China faces economic collapse, decoupling from world markets, expert says. So this is China expert Frank Xie, Xie, and he believes that when the trade war has escalated to a much higher level with the new round of tariffs, once those new round of tariffs are implemented, it will bring devastating consequences to China's economy while not having a major impact on the United States. In an interview with the Chinese language edition of the Epoch Times, I did an interview for an hour earlier today. If you haven't listened to my Tavi Costa interview, I think it's excellent. His views and research is just superb. And definitely follow him on Twitter if you're on Twitter. In an interview with the Chinese language edition of the Epoch Times, Xi, an associate professor at the University of South Carolina School of Business Administration, so he's Chinese and he's he's a professor now here in the United States at the University of South Carolina School of Business Administration, said that when this latest tariff increase is imposed, the United States and China will become completely decoupled economically. Quote, the Chinese Communist regime has been trying to drag the trade talks out to give itself more time, and the Trump administration is fully aware of that. Probably also they've been hoping that Trump will lose in the 2020 election, and I'm sure China, from what I've heard from a number of people, that China's been trying to help the other candidates in the Democrat Party. In addition, Beijing has broken its promises several times. They promised to buy agricultural products, but later changed their mind. At a certain point, they even promised to buy large quantities of agricultural products, but they did not make any purchase thereafter. They have certainly irritated the American people, she said. Quote, President Trump doesn't trust the Chinese Communist regime anymore. That is why he keeps increasing tariffs on Chinese goods. She thinks the Chinese Communist Party is eyeing the European market because it's losing the U.S. market. Well, that's not necessarily the best strategy because the European Union looks in even worse shape right now on a relative basis than the U.S. And then he also talks about, let's see here, based on Xi's analysis. Okay, so Xi thinks, this expert, his name is Xi, he thinks that the European Union is expected to demand the same terms from China as the United States has obtained through the trade talks. I don't know if I agree with him on that, but that's what he says. So based on his analysis, Japan, the United Kingdom, will certainly take the same stance as the United States. He says that Italy is the only G7 country that has participated in China's One Belt, One Road. However, Italy is in the process of forming a new government, which may very likely withdraw from One Belt, One Road. That's what she said. In the European Union, the next battleground of the U.S.-China trade war, the battle has just begun. He thinks the European Union will eventually stand by the side of the United States. That would be interesting. It doesn't seem that way now. It seems like Germany is still cozying up to China. Seems like France is cozying up to China. I don't know if I agree with him on that. Anyways, I'm just reporting what this article says. In the European Union, okay, let me do it. Okay, I lost track for a second. He pointed out that the Chinese Communist Party, if the Chinese Communist Party loses the United States, Europe, and Japanese markets, essentially the whole world is shutting the door to China, and it will return to the closed country state. In this expert's opinion, China has basically lost its chance in the trade talks, and the Chinese Communist Party has no choice but to continue to fight stubbornly and desperately, and at the expense of Chinese consumers. Also, I would say Chinese savers. Anyone who's saving in the currency is at risk, and from what I'm hearing in sources, even people inside the Chinese government at the mid-level and upper level are worried about their savings in the Chinese currency. So from the upper to the middle level of the Chinese Communist Party, they all know that no matter how they try to procrastinate, there isn't much time left before the Chinese regime is hit hard by the trade war. We'll see what we'll see next is capital flight. So we're already starting to see capital flight, and many CCP officials will accelerate their plans to leave China. Wow, interesting. According to Xi, the trade war will have little effect on the U.S. economy. That's because China's retaliatory tariff increases are mostly imposed on automobiles, auto parts, petroleum, and agricultural products. Actually, China won't be able to restrict the imports of these products because it has a high reliance and demand for them, he said. However, the United States can easily replace Chinese imports with products from other countries. The key issue is whether there are options. So I don't know if it's easy to replace all the Chinese products. There's a lot of plastic molded injection products. If you're familiar with manufacturing, there's a lot of, we're not 3D printing all these plastic pieces yet. They may make a 3D model mold, and then it gets plastic mold injection, which are the plastic mold injections are very expensive. So you to make the initial plastic mold injection, it's very expensive, thousands of dollars, and then it's easier to knock them off cheap to make like kids' toys and other like plastic containers and things like that. But there are articles coming out from Bloomberg that a lot of companies are already shifting their supply chain. They're not willing to wait, so they're already starting to make plans to move their factories if they haven't already done so. And then those factories might not come back to China for 10 years or more once they're gone. For China to impose tariffs on American imports, there was a Bloomberg article a couple weeks ago where they followed a global manufacturer that was producing in China for 20 or 30 years. And over the last year, the story followed this manufacturer for a year. And they were showing all the difficulties that the person in charge of Asian operations, he was American, but he spoke fluent Mandarin, and all the difficulties he had trying to move factories over to Thailand. For China to impose tariffs on American imports, this would only increase purchase prices for Chinese consumers. It's a suicidal act, she said. For the United States, consumer reliance on Chinese products is essentially about a preference for bargains, and almost all Chinese products can be replaced with imports from other countries. Therefore, the impact is completely manageable. I don't know if I fully agree with him on that. It's interesting that he has that opinion. There's a lot of places like Walmart and Costco and others where a lot of the products are made in China, especially all the plastic parts. So we'll see. More importantly, the restructuring of the global supply chain with companies moving manufacturing out of China is devastating to China's economy. She pointed out that it's become clear the trade war will be a prolonged confrontation between the two countries, and the supply chain will continue to shift to other countries from China. Most notably, Taiwan, Vietnam, Bangladesh, South Korea, and India are replacing China's role as the biggest global manufacturing hub. As a result, in the near future, tens of millions of Chinese workers will be out of a job. In addition, the decline in China's exports to the United States will drastically reduce China's trade surplus, which in turn will exhaust China's foreign exchange reserves. And China's already running a current account deficit. The Chinese regime's ability to intervene in the yuan exchange rate will also decrease as a result. That will then trigger, which is why China is going to derivatives, because they don't want to sell all their treasuries, and they don't want to spend all of their immediate dollars. That's why they're using derivatives, guys, for the leverage. The bill does not come due immediately with the derivatives. The margin calls, from what it sounds like, according to Jeffrey Snyder's research, he thinks the margin calls are, for China's derivatives position, the margin calls are every 3 months or so. That will then trigger a new round of bubbles bursting, such as a housing market crash, banks going bankrupt, and a credit crisis. China's economy will decline from the bursting of the real estate bubble to higher unemployment to the deterioration of the entire economic environment. Combined with inflation, the Chinese economy is facing an almost complete collapse, she predicts. Wow. That's interesting. It's very similar to a lot of other experts now, like Kyle Bass and others. Another important insight gained through the U.S.-China trade war is that the Chinese Communist Party has revealed its true nature in its tit-for-tat tariff retaliation, she said. Okay, finally, the United States, from the government to the common people, has come to realize that the Chinese Communist Party is an evil regime. It doesn't hesitate to sacrifice the interests of the Chinese people for the sake of its own survival. Interesting stuff, guys. So I'm not going to be here that much longer for this show. I am going to dinner in a couple minutes, guys. So I will take a look at listener questions and comments very quickly. I did not get any super chats today. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Oh, thank you for the $5 super chat. Lorky asks, what would happen if China runs out of forex reserves? China's currency, the exchange rate, will go crazy. You will start to see prices in China go crazy. You will start to see people in China who hold a lot of yuan or RMB as savings. They will want to dump the currency even faster. To a certain extent, that is already happening now, Lorky. So to a certain extent, China already has higher food prices. They're starting to accelerate, especially from what I hear in pork, because there is legitimate shortages. Chinese Communist Party, in the speech that was translated, that the Chinese state-run media did not cover, they covered a politically spun propaganda version. They left out a lot of the admissions of the pork shortage. So you would start to see the velocity of money in China pick up. You would start to see capital flight. China has capital controls, but the capital controls have gotten stricter recently, but every year or so, normally what happens is the Chinese people who want to get their money out figure a way around the capital controls. No, I'm not going to PF Chang's. Their portions are too small. They're one of the worst shrinkflation ones. I haven't been to PF Chang's in like 2 years. PF Chang's is getting killed by shrinkflation. If I remember correctly, it was like $25 or $30 for a tiny little beef dish, and the portion was already down 50%. You're not going to see me back there. So I'm just reporting the stories as I see them. A lot of the stuff coming out, the bad news, is about China. Now, I think my educated guess is the European banks are the counterparties on this derivatives trade, the massive selling of forward dollar swaps. Yeah, I should put a P.O. box on. I'll try to work on that in the upcoming weeks. I think I'm going to have a steak. I think we're going to go American here. We're going to go steak, French fries, and a beer. I haven't had steak in a while. Ryan says, I could start my own TV show with this much content. I've actually been asked. Real Vision TV wanted me to do on-camera television work for them with shows. Unfortunately, they were telling me how big their platform is and that I should that they were doing me a favor and that I should do all this work for them for free. There's been a nice correction in the gold and silver mining stocks. I'll do that on another show. I was planning another show about this. Yeah, I agree with you, Bill, exactly. Especially if they're going to want a lot of my time to do camera work, because, like, that's makeup and... I mean, I'm not... For free, I'm not going to let someone put makeup on me. I'm not going to dress up in a monkey suit and a tie and let people put makeup on me for free. No, thank you. Max says he prefers Japanese food. I do love Japanese steakhouse. Steak, shrimp, chicken, vegetables, really good stuff. Ribeye or New York strip? Good question. Ribeye or New York strip? Both of them are really good. It depends on my mood. I actually make my own steak. I make a drunken cowboy steak. I marinate it overnight in beer, barbecue sauce, soy sauce, hot sauce, apple cider vinegar, and lime juice. You mix it together before you put the steak in. And then you put, after the steak is marinated at least overnight, mixed together, then you put a spice rub on, just basic stuff with salt, pepper, garlic salt, granulated garlic. I call it the drunken cowboy. So when the stories come out about the U.S., there's going to be stories coming out about problems in the U.S. soon. Because the U.S. Treasury is going to have to go to the well very, very soon. There was actually a press release. I don't know how many people noticed this. I don't think Zero Hedge covered it. Guys, Zero Hedge still hasn't covered the Bank of Jinzhou stuff. I don't know why Zero Hedge is not covering this. I think the HSBC bank rumors are important. Zero Hedge hasn't covered any of those. The Kyle Bass theory, his thesis there with the Bank of England, he hasn't covered any. Zero Hedge hasn't covered any of that. Zero Hedge didn't cover my Kyle Bass's thesis was proof correct how the Bank of Jinzhou didn't get help. I used to know someone who was at Zero Hedge, one of the guys who started it, but he is no longer there. I won't name his name because he does listen to this podcast, so I can't name him by name. Excellent super chat question by Eric. Last one here, guys, before I wrap this up, because I have to go in a couple minutes. Do you really think China wants to talk to the U.S.? Do they really need an end to tariffs? At a certain point they will, Eric. At a certain point they will. If there's enough capital flight, there's a lot of people in China who want their savings out of the currency. If there's enough of that, if there's enough net capital outflows, if food prices are going crazy. Look, China should have bought U.S. pork. They're hurting themselves really, really bad. They need the pork. Other than the U.S. and China are the two largest producers of pork in the entire world, and it's not even close. The third largest producer of pork is not even close to the U.S. to China and the U.S. And the U.S.'s pork production was quite a bit below China's pork production. So there was only two major pork producers in the entire planet. So I think China should have a deal. China was offered, like I said, Kyle Bass admitted this and others have confirmed this 3 or 4 months ago before the G7 meetings, I believe. China was offered a very good win-win trade deal, and it wasn't good enough. China did not want to compromise. They wanted all the tariffs removed. They wanted the Huawei CFO released. They wanted all these stipulations before they would, and then they wanted 50 pages of a trade agreement removed so absolutely nothing was enforceable. So they wanted total and complete domination, a win, a total and complete win, no mutually beneficial win-win trade deal at all. So I think there's going to be, Eric, to answer your question here, there's going to be more pain in China before any agreement. I could see this lasting a while. But China, if they're smart, they should cave. But Xi is worried about a regime change. Xi is really, really worried that if he does what's best for the Chinese people, it means that not only is his political career over, but he could be taken out. Okay, from what I've heard, there's been multiple assassination attempts against Xi, and there's a fight between Xi and the other rival inside. China Uncensored talks about this. There's another major rival, a former head of the Chinese Communist Party there, Xi'an, I think is his name. So if he does a compromise deal, that is looked at as weak, and the other higher-ups, the party members, could retaliate against Xi. So that's why he's not doing it, even though a trade deal would benefit the Chinese people. Because they need to bring in pork. It would help stop the increase in food prices. Although it wouldn't help stop the increase in vegetables. I'm hearing the vegetable prices, some of them are going insanely high. Okay, Pebble Man, thank you for the super chat. I can't repeat what you said. You guys can read it. Eric, I think all governments are like this. Now, it's to different degrees, though. Okay, guys, well, that's it for right now. I will put links up to the articles for this. But thank you very much to my Patreon account contributors. And definitely, if you haven't done so, listen to the Tavi Costa interview. It's very good. It's from a hedge fund manager. And one of the juicy tidbits in there was his hedge fund started shorting the RMB, the yuan, the offshore RMB. And he asked his broker, his Forex broker who was setting up the trade, who was on the other side of his trade. And he was told that it was the Chinese central bank, that it was the People's Bank of China. So if you're wondering why Kyle Bass lost out for a number of years on that trade, the interview is the Tavi Costa interview I put out a couple hours ago on my channel. And the People's Bank of China was on the China Central Bank was on the other side of the trade. So the hedge fund managers like Kyle Bass, Tavi Costa at Crescott Capital, others who were trying to short the RMB and the yuan, no wonder they lost on the trade, because they were literally going up against a central bank that was blowing through their dollar reserves and was establishing an enormous derivatives position. So even though Kyle Bass is a billionaire and he's made a lot of money in the past, he was going up against someone who had, at one point, almost unlimited resources. Okay, guys, well, that's it for now. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to continue to make great content. The next major goal for Wall Street for Main Street is getting over the 30,000 YouTube channel subscriber mark. So now that we're over 5 million, it's now on to the next goal, and it's over 30,000 YouTube channel subscribers as soon as possible. Everyone have a great weekend.